Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I am really excited about today's show for a number of reasons. First of all, later on, I'm going to set the stage for what's going to be a major, I think, really fun announcement for DawgNation on Monday. I'll tell you about this during the show, but it's a look ahead to the summer, and one of the reasons why we think this summer around DawgNation is going to be more fun than it's ever been before, and it's going to include many of you. I can't wait to tell you about that. I'll start to kind of explain some of those details a little bit later on in today's show. That's going to be really fun. But the thing I'm probably most excited about for today as well is I'm going to play an audio clip in just a moment of former Georgia linebacker Nate Patrick talking about Zamir White, and if you weren't already strongly anticipating White's debut in a Georgia uniform, I think it'll be even more so once you hear this. It's going to be a really great show. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, as a kid, I grew up as a huge sports fan, and, you know, back in the 80s, I don't know if kids today are still the same way, but back in the 80s, it was kind of the age of posters. You know, if you were a sports fan kid, you had posters all over your wall. I had, like, the Dale Murphy, Dwight Gooden stickball poster where Gooden's pitching to Murphy, and Murphy's holding the stick in his hand, and there were a lot of kind of cool posters like that. There were a million ones involving the NBA guys of that era. It was kind of the poster era. So when I think about Georgia football, sometimes I think about who are the players in this team that the kids will put the posters on their wall of, and obviously Jake Fromm is one of those guys, and DeAndre Swift is one of those guys. The defense has its share of those guys. Maybe J.R. Reed, maybe that to a certain extent. And there's also this crop of players who are about to burst on the scene for Georgia who may also be the kind of poster players one day, the kind of faces that you'd see on posters or maybe in more of the modern parlance on the front of the ticket or the front of the media guide or something like that. You know what a superstar player in college football looks like because that glossy image is kind of splashed all over the place. Well, of all the players that could have that mentioned about them, I don't know that there's anyone amongst Georgia fans right now, though, that generates more excitement than Zamir White does. Now, admittedly, this is all about the what's it going to look like once we get to see him variety, because let's face it, most of us haven't seen a ton from White. He is overcoming 2 knee injuries suffered over the last couple of years, and everything about White and what he's going to be is whispers of, did you hear he did this, and did you see that he did that, and my gosh, how good's he going to be? How much does this incredible highlight film from his high school career, how well is that going to translate to the college realm? That's just part of the conversation, but I don't think it's wrong when it comes to White, nor do I think it's an exaggeration. There is something here on DawgNation Daily on Zamir, by the way, that I've been trying to get to for a couple of days. We just haven't had time. There's been so much going on, but I didn't want any more time to go by before we had a chance to talk about this. Back on G-Day, after the game, when we were at the UGA bookstore for our DawgNation postgame show, as you know, we had a chance to talk to Georgia linebacker Nate Patrick. And Patrick on that show told a story about Zamir White that, gosh, if you weren't already excited, I think you're going to be more excited now than really ever before about what White may be able to do once he's fully cleared and fully ready to go during practice. Because apparently in the brief window of time that Natrez saw Zamir before the injury happened last summer, he was very impressed with what he saw. Now, let me set this up a little bit. Natrez in this conversation is going to say spring, but he's actually conflating spring with summer. White was a summer practicer for the Georgia Bulldogs last summer before all of this went down. But I asked him, I said, you know, Natrez, how good do you think Zamir White can be? But then I also kind of prefaced that question with, I guess you probably haven't even seen him practice all that much. And then Nate Patrick said this.
But I have. So let me tell you, the spring right before he got injured. So he was practicing. I think he got injured like in the end of his first spring, towards the end of his first spring. And when I tell you, he ripped us apart, literally like so hard to tackle. No one could tackle him one-on-one, like, because he actually did a couple scrimmages. I think he did the first scrimmage, maybe the second scrimmage.
This would have been in August.
Of course, yeah. And we could not tackle him. Like, we couldn't bring him down, and he ran really tough. So I'm excited to see what he's going to do to people in the opposite color jersey. So I can't wait, man. I'm glad his recovery is going well.
Yeah.
I hope that he'll be back soon.
I mean, come on, y'all. what do you do with that? How excited does that get you for what you may see from Zamir White once the fall rolls around? And to use Nate Patrick's own words, once he's doing these kinds of things to guys in another team's jersey, wearing another color jersey, how much fun is that going to be? Because Nate Patrick's a proud guy. Those other Georgia defensive players, they're proud guys. They don't like admitting that anybody in the offensive side of the ball got the best of them. How many times we heard that story of how much these knockdown dragouts occur behind closed doors during these private scrimmages. But Natrez says in those couple scrimmages that he had before the injury took place, we couldn't bring him down. We couldn't tackle him. He was making guys miss. I don't know.
I don't know that I can answer how much.
I don't know. I don't know about you, but that makes me really, really want to get a chance to see Nate Patrick on the field this fall. That gets me really, really excited about all of that. That's just a really fun thing to think about. Now, does what Kirby Smart says and what he has said kind of match up with all of this? Well, this is really more about, is he on his way back to being able to do the kinds of things that Nate Patrick said he was doing last year before that second knee injury occurred? And frankly, when it comes to Kirby on Zamir this spring, it was kind of coy, right? I mean, sometimes Kirby seemed to kind of keep his cards very close to the vest with this. I mean, you want to go back to the beginning of the spring, as I told you on DawgNation Daily when that happened. Frankly, I left that first press conference with Kirby kind of a little disappointed that Kirby didn't have more favorable, more positive things to say about Zamir White. Caution was clearly in the air, and that was seemingly going to be the tone they tried to set with Zamir all spring long. In fact, here is what Kirby said going back to March about how they were going to kind of take it slow when it comes to Zamir. Here's Kirby.
Well, I don't know that I can answer how much of it. I mean, that's going to come into fall camp. I think anytime you have a non-contact ACL and then you have a second one, you've got to be careful because we're talking about two different knees and really a completely non-contact injury. So when that happens, makes you wonder, hey, is the kid going to be able to progress this time as fast as he did last time? So for us, he's going to be able to do some. I mean, he's running really well. He's doing a lot of straight line stuff. He's just not going to be involved in the scrimmaging and the contact part. So ultimately, how do I know he's going to contribute to the team? I don't know that. I'm not going to know that until probably early in fall camp. I'm very pleased with his work ethic. I mean, he knows that's his future. He takes care of his knee. He rehabs hard. He does everything we ask him to do. I think Ron is kind of one of the best in the country at dealing with this. When you look at the significant injuries he's dealt with Gurley and Nick Chubb, especially at that position. So he has somebody really good to rely on in regards to that. And Zamir's managed that really well.
So Kirby Smart says, listen, I'm not going to make any promises about how much he's going to contribute this season. I don't know. I don't know if this knee recovery for Zamir is going to be like the one last time was. That's what Kirby Smart said at the beginning of the spring, and after the G-Day game concluded on April 20th, a game that obviously Zamir did not play in, but kind of one final time to talk to Kirby about where things kind of stood with Zamir White. Once again, Kirby was pretty non-committal about, listen, I'm not making any promises about anything with what this young man's going to be able to do on the field this fall. Here was Kirby from that day.
I mean, he's fine. He's doing well. We're expecting him to come back. He's right where he needs to be, according to Ron Corson's schedule of knee injury. He does individual. He goes out and does blitz pickup and walkthroughs. He catches balls, but he doesn't do competitive contact.
So no competitive contact, but other than that, kind of right where he needs to be. We'll have more on that little phrasing in just a moment because I do think that's interesting from Kirby. And if you're watching on video, the other thing you've seen is some of the video that our buddy Connor Raleigh shot from the pregame warm-ups that day where I don't know what kind of physical condition he is in terms of his knee, but in terms of the physical condition of how he looks in a uniform, Zamir White seems pretty healthy, all things considered, and seems to be in really good shape there. The knee itself a little more difficult to evaluate, but in terms of being ready to rock and roll, he certainly looks the part of being a running back capable of doing big things in the SEC. And when you see the way that Zamir looks in that video, it's a lot easier to imagine Nate Patrick saying we couldn't tackle him back when he was healthy. It's a lot easier to understand kind of how that gets there. But for a little deeper look at the current health situation, Kirby says right on track, and Kirby mentions Ron Corson. Well, here on DawgNation Daily, we also got a chance recently to talk to another guy that talked to Ron Corson about the health of Zamir White. And maybe it's just tone of voice because, frankly, what Kirby says and what former Georgia running back Robert Edwards is about to say are pretty similar, but Kirby kind of says it in a way that's kind of loud and kind of forceful and makes you wonder, is the news really as good as I want for it to be? Robert Edwards has a slightly different tone in his voice, and this is the kind of thing that, once again, as a Georgia fan, makes you feel good that you may be heading towards a fall where Zamir White can be a big part of the offensive story for Georgia. In fact, here is Robert Edwards relaying the message that he got about the health of Zamir White.
Talking to him, of course, and he's right on target of being ready for the season. He's strong. Everything looks bright for him. So I think he's just excited to have an opportunity to get out on the field. Right now, he's just doing a few things during individual drills, no real contact, but just to be a part of the drills and a part of his group, I think he's excited and he's looking forward to the season.
So one way or another, it's actually probably a good sign that the message coming about White is consistent. Robert Edwards says, hey, he's right on track. Kirby Smart on G-Day says he's right on track. But maybe what's even more fun than that is the fact that Natrez Patrick says, I saw him before he got hurt, and let me tell you, this is a player that Georgia fans are going to want to see tearing up opposing defenses. Frankly, I won't even hide my excitement for a chance to see White on the field. I can't wait for this opportunity, and I sort of get the feeling from conversations I have with many of you that a lot of Georgia fans feel the very same way. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast pretty much wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We just really appreciate you being with us on the show today. We'll talk to Mike Griffith coming up in just a couple of moments. There are a couple draft-related items I want to talk to Mike about, and one of the things in particular is some of the Georgia players that may factor big in next year's draft. I think Mike's going to have some interesting things to say about that. We will do that in a moment. Let me also let you know about this, that coming up on Monday here on DawgNation Daily, I am really excited about being able to tell you about why this summer around DawgNation is probably going to be the most fun summer we've had here on DawgNation Daily and around DawgNation.com, and this includes many of you. There's something that a lot of you have been saying, hey, when are y'all going to do this? When are you going to do that? Well, I was in a meeting yesterday. I got to tell you, we got some really fun stuff coming up, and I can't wait to personally invite each of you to be a part of it a couple different times here this summer. This is going to be an amazing summer around DawgNation, and it's just going to be a great, great time. So please make sure that you're with us around this time on Monday's show. I'll do my part to tell you about this a couple days between now and then. But on Monday, we have a really fun announcement about a brand new thing we're going to be doing this summer around DawgNation, and a great opportunity for you to just really have a great time with us. I cannot wait to tell you all about that. That big announcement is coming up on Monday. But before that, though, here on DawgNation Daily, it's time to go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And I want to go back to yesterday's edition of DawgNation Daily for a moment when Jeff Sintel was in the program. We had a chance to talk to Jeff about five-star linebacker Mikael Sherman. And my question to Jeff was this. Jeff, we had a lot of chatter about Sherman around G-Day, and after that, it seems like things have kind of gone quiet a little bit, at least in terms of Sherman himself personally. There's been a lot of online chatter about Sherman, but kind of where do things stand right now with the five-star linebacker? And here is the update that Jeff gave us on Sherman yesterday. Here's Jeff.
In the wake or even during his official visit to Ohio State last week, that crystal balls continue to pop up for Georgia. With Sherman, I have a feeling that the following is going to happen. I have a feeling now that he's seen Ohio State, he'll probably take maybe one more visit, and that will be to LSU.
The reason why I play that audio from Jeff is because the news now may be even better than what Jeff related as being yesterday. Jeff says, hey, you saw he was at Ohio State, but even while he was there was a lot of talk about Georgia, a lot of online predictions from recruiting insiders saying, we think Sherman's going to land with the Dogs. Jeff says the next domino to fall, likely maybe the only other domino to fall, is maybe there's a chance that Mikael Sherman also takes a visit to LSU. Well, here's great news for a Georgia fan. Apparently that potential visit to LSU, apparently you don't have to worry about that anymore because of something that Sherman himself put on social media last night. Let me show you this tweet from Mikael Sherman, who now says, it's between Ohio State and Georgia. No interviews. I appreciate the coaches for presenting me opportunities and the fan bases which came with them. Appreciate you all. I'm going to commend Mikael Sherman here for something for a moment. how refreshing is it to see this young man who has been so open during the entirety of his recruiting process? He has liked George and talked about that openly. He has closed off speculation about where he's not going. He was at Ohio State recently. Some people seem to think that the nature of that visit leads them to believe that he may soon pick Georgia. But this is not a young man who's necessarily, been, kind of in the shadows, in the darkness with his recruitment. He's been pretty open and honest with the entire thing. And on Twitter, he now says, hey, I'm down to these final two. It's either going to be Georgia, it's going to be Ohio State. It sounds like he's kind of shutting things down from a communication standpoint. But something else to let you know, though. Apparently, right before Sherman decided to go radio silent, he did talk to our own DawgNation recruiting insider, Jeff Sintel, and my understanding is we're actually going to hear from Sherman today. He's going to update his recruitment as a part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger a little bit later on this afternoon. So we'll get more of an update on this, but it certainly seems like the next big domino that could potentially fall for this 2020 recruiting class is Sherman potentially choosing between Georgia and Ohio State with a lot of seeming momentum for the Dogs in this one. Does what we hear from Sherman later on today make us as Georgia fans feel better or worse about this? Well, I guess we'll have to wait till 3 p.m. to decide, because honestly, I haven't heard what Sherman has had to say, but I guess we'll all hear it today, 3 p.m., as a part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, an update coming on the 5-star linebacker. But interesting from him that he says, my recruitment's down to just these two schools. It's Georgia, it's Ohio State. Thanks to everybody else for playing along. I'm now down to the Buckeyes and the Dogs, which a lot of people thought it was going to come down to all the time anyway. And we'll see if Georgia can now win this head-to-head battle between the Ohio State Buckeyes and Georgia. This should be a fun one to watch. It's Around the Doghouse, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And whether you need foundation repair or basement waterproofing, or you got a crawl space issue you got to get taken care of, Engineered Solutions of Georgia are the ones to help you, and they can offer you a lifetime of support. So if it's a cracked foundation, wet basement, damp crawl space, whatever, you can have one of their qualified technicians come out and take good care of you. They're the ones that we trust here around DawgNation, because they're the ones that have a full-time engineer on staff. Simply give them a call. It's 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. Yesterday on the program, I talked a lot about those freshmen potentially making a big impact in the Georgia defense this season. There was one name in that conversation that I did not mention yesterday that I think we do need to mention today for a couple of reasons. Because of what Kirby Smart said, because of what I think that fans are going to see more from him this fall. We will do that later on. But for now, let's talk to our buddy Mike Griffith right here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Here on DawgNation Daily, we'll say hello to Mike Griffith here. Good coverage of the NFL draft over the last couple days. A lot of Georgia names factor prominently in that discussion. And, Mike, if you don't mind, that's kind of where I want to begin our conversation here today. There's a lot of data points you can pay attention to. It's the 7 players Georgia did get drafted. It's the couple relatively high-profile names that didn't get drafted. Maybe some from that draft crew for Georgia didn't get drafted as highly as they wanted to, or maybe as highly as they should have been had they, chosen to leave school to come out early. And you can kind of process all of that in your own way. I guess, though, on the grading of a pass-fail basis, I do think the draft ends up being a pretty good commercial overall for Georgia, more good than maybe less than good. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. You get 7 players picked, yay, and I think that's good. I think it shows that, Kirby Smart and Georgia are developing NFL talent. And really, a couple of the early entrants were Kirby guys. But realistically, a lot of these guys were Mark Richt guys. And, next year is when the Kirby effect really kicks in, and we'll see a lot of players from Georgia drafted. I wanted to go offline here, B.A. Usually ask the questions, but I wanted to bring up a stat that I thought was fascinating, and I wanted to make sure our DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers heard this. When it came to the NFL draft, we all know how powerful that the SEC is, and that every year the SEC has more players selected than any other league. But oftentimes people outside say, well, it's just Alabama at the top, and it's a top-heavy league. Well, I wanted to run these numbers by you real quick from other leagues. Alabama obviously led the league with 10 picks, and that represented 15%, 15.8% of the players selected from the SEC. And that may seem like a lot, but as I looked around the country at other leagues, I saw that Clemson had 6 of the ACC's 27 picks. Clemson had 22% of the ACC's pick. Ohio State had 22.5% of the Big Ten's draft selections. Washington had 24% of the Pac-12's NFL draft selections. And sit down for this one. Oklahoma had 40% of the players that the Big 12 had selected. And that's another reason why Oklahoma didn't belong in the college football playoff ahead of Georgia last year. They played in a very, very weak league.
Yeah, I saw that you put that in one of your stories at DawgNation.com. I thought that was pretty interesting. And frankly, I do think that the Big 12 draft stats are pretty glaring. And I was going to talk more about that in the show today as well. I'm glad you brought that up. But when we turn our attention to the 2020 draft for Georgia, I think it's kind of funny how a lot of this chatter is already emerging, including a lot of steam right now behind Jake Fromm. And obviously, we've seen Fromm really grow as a quarterback over the course of the last couple of seasons. And the one thing I keep coming back to for why Fromm seems to factor so prominently near the front end of the 2020 draft conversation right now is when it comes to one of the real rare skills, sort of those you either have it or you don't type things, Fromm is just a really accurate quarterback. I want to say he was, 9th in the country last year in yards per attempt at 9 per throw. He was, 11th, I want to say, in overall completion percentage, near 68%. Those are the kinds of things that not every quarterback is going to be able to match. When it comes to Fromm as a potential, not just first-round pick, but as Mel Kiper has suggested, top 10 pick, for me, it all comes down to the Fromm accuracy. Do you agree with that sentiment? Is that what you think potentially is going to be Fromm's ticket into the first round where you choose to leave next year?
Not necessarily, and I'm going to tell you why. All we heard about was Drew Lock being a first-round pick last year. Going into the season, I mean, this is the game that we all play. Everybody's a first-rounder right now. Now the guys from Georgia that didn't get picked or went later said, yeah, I was hearing that about me too. Everybody's a first rounder, but it's like Dick Vitale when you watch him call basketball. Everybody's a PT-peer and is a championship contender, but there's obviously only so many that actually are. When it finally filters down, when push comes to shove, what we learn about the NFL draft process is it is the exact opposite of recruiting. Whereas in recruiting, we talk about, he can do this well, he does this well, he does this great, he does this great. And we just assume they'll get coached up to learn all the other stuff they're not good at. In the NFL draft, it's what he doesn't do well. He doesn't do this, he doesn't do that, he doesn't do this. It's a much more grueling and difficult process. Jake Fromm does have weaknesses. They will be exposed by the combine, by the game film. But right now, because he is a marquee player on a national championship contender, Jake is going to have a great opportunity to prove that he has the it factor. And to me, that will ultimately control whether or not Jake Fromm goes in the first half of the NFL draft next year. He's got to win the big game. And the big game is the national championship. And it's tough. Because I don't think Jake has other measurables that necessarily make him a top 5 franchise quarterback. He does not have the strongest arm in college football, nor would he be in the top half of the NFL in arm strength. He does not have the tallest stature. That works against him. That is not a strength. His foot speed is merely adequate. But all this said, I think Jake Fromm is a championship quarterback. I think he's a tremendous decision maker. I think he's unbelievably accurate. But just being realistic about it, I'm going to say the things that the NFL scouts are going to say at the end of the day. And he's not going to be surrounded by Georgia talent. It's going to be a lot more level playing field. And where you go has everything to do with it. As I pointed out, the example I love to use is Steve Young. When Steve Young, and I don't know, maybe this is too old for some of the people that are watching and listening, but when Steve Young was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who was he? He was a nobody. He goes to the San Francisco 49ers and he becomes a Hall of Famer. So a lot of it has to do with the team needs, and also I think Jake needs to prove this year that he's got the it factor. He's got to get over the Alabama hump.
I think one of the interesting storylines as well for Georgia in 2020 is going to be the potential this team could lose 4 of its starting offensive linemen to the draft. Andrew Thomas, I think, is virtually a shoo-in to leave at the end of the year. I think Isaiah Wilson could. I think that Ben Cleveland might. I think that Solomon Kinley will at least consider it. 4 starting offensive linemen, they're at least in the mix to potentially be, drafted players next season. Cleveland's name, for instance, is already on kind of some of these early big boards that are out there. Thomas is going to be at the the virtual top of seemingly all of these. Now Georgia's got depth behind these guys, but we could be heading into 2020 with at least the possibility that the Georgia offensive line looks very different than it expects to look in 2019.
No question, and of course that will affect Jake Fromm's decision, and why wouldn't it? You lose those 4 bodyguards, and I do think you lose all 4 of them. I really do, unless somebody gets an injury and doesn't get to play the snaps they want. All those guys are NFL players. We know that. So you lose your 4 offensive linemen. Jake Fromm says, wow, I really got to go. J.J. Holloman looks and says, I'm losing my quarterback. DeAndre Swift's already said he's probably leaving. I mean, right there we're talking about 7 potential first-team All-SEC guys that aren't going to be back next year on offense. We're not even talking about Richard LeCounte on defense. So to your point, BA, it's going to be a mass exodus. It's going to be bittersweet because these are championship caliber players. These are great football players. Yes, if they all came back, couldn't Georgia win the national championship? Of course they could, but they're not going to come back. So 2019 is the window. This is the immediate window. Now 2020 is a reload year. It's not a rebuild, okay? Because Kirby Smart has done an incredible job recruiting. So it's not a rebuild, it's a reload. And we don't know what that next group of Bulldogs will do, but we do know that they've been ranked among the best in the country. And we're going to find out if Georgia truly is the emerging dynasty that many of us believe it is, with the recruiting classes they put together, with the player development. When you look at some of the position coaches that they have, particularly guys like Sam Pittman, and I think Charlton Warren was an unbelievable hire. Kirby obviously has confidence in Schumann and Lanning, and James Coley with his South Florida recruiting connections. And now this year we get to find out more about Coley as a coordinator. We will truly find out about the future of Georgia football in 2020. We know that this group right here has got what it takes. We know that, BA. So to your point, yes, I think there will be a mass exodus on offense. And to build off of your point, I think the window is 2019, and I think the sense of urgency is higher than ever for Georgia to win the SEC championship and the national championship this year.
I'm interested in DeAndre Swift as well because, on the one hand, the NFL seems to be moving away from the idea of first-round pick running backs. There's a lot of skepticism about that among many NFL GMs, and yet for the guys that do seem to fit well in that conversation, Swift looks like those guys. He is a threat in the passing game. He does have the kind of lateral quickness. In a lot of ways, he seems to really fit the modern NFL, the way that Alvin Kamara seems to work for the New Orleans Saints offense, the way that Christian McCaffrey works for the Carolina Panthers offense. My understanding of Swift, he seems like a similar kind of player. Do you think that Swift has the potential? I'll take the word potential out because I think obviously we'd agree with that. Do you think that Swift is a first-round pick where he, too, consider leaving in 2020?
I'll put the potential back in. You took it out. I'm putting it back in, BA. I think he is leaving in 2020. I think he does have the potential to be the first-rounder. The issue with Swift is the durability question. We don't know if DeAndre can get through a whole season healthy, quite frankly. And it sounds unfair, but I'm speaking in NFL terminology. These are the same questions they're going to ask. We know that he had the double hernia surgery with the groin issue, right? We know that he's had a foot problem. We know that he's been limited in some games in terms of carries. Now, last year, DeAndre Swift went through treatment every day, virtually every day of the week. That kid was going through treatment just so he could practice. So we saw a guy soldier through some incredibly painful ailments last year, post-surgery, post-double hernia surgery. And he deserves a tip of the cap for that, to still have a 1,000-yard season. Now he's had a completely healthy off-season. And this coming season, we're going to find out how durable DeAndre Swift really is. Because Kirby Smart is on record saying, I'm going to give him as much work as he can handle. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Brian Herrien, and I think Brian is an NFL player. I think he will be drafted, albeit later in the draft. And I think Brian will have over 1,000 total yards and potentially double his career yardage, touchdowns, and touches. So I think Brian Herrien figures heavily into the mix. Now, that said, DeAndre Swift is going to be watched for his production this year because this is it. And the durability is the question mark. And if DeAndre can't show that he's durable, he's not going to be anybody's first-round pick and could slide to the third round. So a lot is going to be on the production. As you said, the talent is unbelievable. You cannot deny the moves, the cuts, the spins, and the ability of DeAndre Swift. But if he ain't out there on Sunday, all that talent doesn't do you any good. So he's got to prove himself durable this year, and that's why the word is potential right now for him as a first-round pick.
Let me finish up with a name that I think is really interesting in terms of how high his ceiling could be or maybe achieving a little less than that, and that's Eric Stokes. Because if you look at the way that DeAndre Baker was developed over the course of his career, and I'm going to use develop for lack of a better word because sometimes it's difficult to know, was he always that good and just sort of proved it once he got to the college level, or did he really become that kind of cornerback under the watchful eye of Kirby Smart? Sometimes it's hard to know, but a guy that seems to be charting a similar course behind him is Eric Stokes, who got a chance to step in and start last year and made the most of that opportunity. And I think, based on what you saw in a brief glimpse during G-Day and what you've kind of assumed has been going on during spring practice, I think he sets up well this year to kind of be a really dependable cornerback for Georgia. I don't know if he goes number 30 overall next season. That'd be probably asking a lot. But to go from a 3-star recruit to a pretty respected NFL draft pick, it would not surprise me to see Eric Stokes travel down that road because I've seen him knock balls out of the air, and that's what cornerbacks are supposed to do at the NFL level. What do you make of Stokes' future, and are you as kind of fascinated by the way that he's developed and grown over the time that he's been at Georgia as I am?
Absolutely, and I do think he's leaving. I think you're going to lose 3/4 of your secondary next year because I think Richard LeCounte's also leaving. Stokes, believe it or not, has a higher ceiling than DeAndre Baker, because he has speed. We saw that with McCole Hardman. McCole Hardman was only a second-year receiver, right? And yet he ran that 4.33, and the Chiefs rang the bell in the second round. Eric Stokes is a 4.3 guy, and Baker ran a 4.52. Baker got drafted in spite of his 40 time and his measurables. He did not have a good combine, and yet and still his skill level was such, and the cornerback class was such that he was the first corner off the board at number 30. Stokes with that 4.3, upside. Now here's my question though, BA. Why wasn't he starting earlier? I still remember sitting in the press box at Missouri watching him come in for Tyson Campbell. You remember Tyson had that fumble recovery for a touchdown, and something happened. I think he separated his shoulder in that game, and so he was throwing up and feeling ill, and he wasn't able to return. And Stokes got put in and was absolute lights out, lockdown coverage. I mean, knocking down balls from Drew Lock, unbelievable things he did, knocking down passes in the end zone. In fact, that was the first time in over a year that Drew Lock did not have a touchdown pass. It was that Missouri-Georgia game. But to get back to what we were talking about, I do think Stokes has a high ceiling. I don't know what I don't know, though. There's a reason that he wasn't starting ahead of Tyson Campbell. Okay, all we see is Saturdays. We don't see the practices day in and day out like Kirby Smart and his staff. So I want to know why he wasn't starting ahead of Tyson Campbell. I want to know what I don't know. What I see on Saturdays, though, looks spectacular. I think he's a wonderful cornerback. I think he's got a high ceiling with that 4.3 speed. We meet him. We talk with Eric Stokes. He's an unbelievable ambassador, tremendously likable young man with charisma. I can't say enough good things about him. I think he could be a first-rounder, but I dial it back because he wasn't a starter last year, but for 3 or 4 games. So what don't I know that Kirby Smart knows? Why was Tyson Campbell ahead of Eric Stokes when every Saturday it seemed like Eric Stokes was outperforming Tyson Campbell? So if he continues to play like he played last year in 3 or 4 games as a starter all season long, I think he absolutely has first-round potential.
I think it'll be an interesting story to watch unfold during this fall, and Mike, we'll look forward to reading your coverage of it at DawgNation.com, including the days ahead here as well. Thanks for being with us on DawgNation Daily, and we'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks, B.A. Great job.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I know it sounds like you hear a conversation like that, a lot of juniors who could be leaving and the possibility of some of this kind of stuff happening, and in some cases some of the guys that left after this past year's season it seems like Georgia could still use. And I guess from a fan's perspective on this, I'm a little different than some people are. This is not the kind of thing that makes me nervous at all, and it's really for a couple of reasons. I think we're heading into a new era of college football where I don't – the old school idea, Nick Saban, who sounds like 1,000 years old sometimes when he talks about some of this stuff anyway, but if you're not a first-round pick, you shouldn't leave school. That's the way things used to be. That's the way that things were years ago. I don't know that's the way that things are now necessarily. I think being in the NFL, even if it's not as that kind of first-round pick sort of bonus baby type thing, just being in the league and getting a chance to work towards your second contract, that may be enough for a lot of these young men right now. After all, they're essentially playing for free in college as it is. Some money may be better than no money, and so we may be in a new age where the first-round guarantee isn't required for guys to want to leave school early. It may be as big a change, over the course of the last couple of years when Chubb and Michelle and those guys decided to say from 2016 to 2017. The world's kind of evolved a good bit since just then. So we're kind of in a new age when it comes to stuff like that. Plus, I'll keep saying this over and over again, that who you bring into a program is more important than who's going out. And frankly, if you've got a glut of seniors, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I can't think of another way to say it. If you've got some sort of clog in the pipeline, then a lot of freshmen are going to say, ooh, that's not the place I want to go. It was the fear of Elijah Holyfield coming back that we've been told led Trey Sanders to end up going to Alabama. At least that's part of what played into that. Sometimes hard to know what the real story is. But the fear of a senior who chooses to return, in some cases, is kind of a turnoff for recruits. So I love the idea of juniors, develop as a freshman, learn the game a little bit as a sophomore, and go out as a junior and dominate, and then go make yourself some money. So if the 2019 season sees a mass exodus for Georgia in the NFL, to me that's all the better way to start bringing in more talent. I'll miss some of the guys who are gone because obviously we followed their careers for a while, but it just opens the door for more talent to come in, and that's the way that successful programs, I think, are supposed to work. Before I do our SEC through, let me remind you that Mother's Day is coming up. Sunday, May 12th is the day to mark down in your calendar. Now, it's probably on your calendar. You just need to make sure that you pay close attention to that. And there's really no better way to get ready for a mom and celebrate her on Mother's Day than to make a brunch for a special day. And you can actually do this right there at your house when you go to Kroger and get the stuff that you need, including, how about this? If you thought about doing like some Prosecco and getting some nice mimosas, that's kind of a staple of a cool Mother's Day brunch. Don't go wait in some long line and, spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars at some overpriced restaurant. Go to Kroger, get the really nice stuff there, make your own mimosas, your own little brunch, your own little meal, and Kroger will give you great savings. So please check that out as we head towards Mother's Day. All right, a few SEC stories I want to get to, and this is going to be a fun one. You may have seen that four-star quarterback and Florida early enrollee Jalen Jones has decided to put himself in the transfer portal very soon after enrolling, which would seem to be the exact opposite of what Dan Mullen said is supposed to happen in college football. Little hypocrisy here from Mullen. Do we have the quote? Can we show this on the screen of what Dan Mullen has previously said about this kind of stuff in the past, which would seem to be, at least a lot of people took it at the time, as a little bit of a jab towards Kirby Smart. Here's what Dan Mullen said before that a lot of people thought was in reference to Justin Fields. He says, I think we did a poor job recruiting if guys were coming in and then immediately walking out the door because it was something different than what they thought it would be, and we lied to them during recruiting. Or we sold them on a dream that wasn't true. Dan Mullen says, if that happens at a place, that's wrong. What has happened to Florida with Jalen Jones to have him decide that he wants to leave school so soon after enrolling? Is this an example of hypocrisy from Mullen? Here is ultimately what the bad news is going to be for a lot of Georgia fans on this. You're going to want to call out Mullen for his hypocrisy. You're going to want to point out the incongruity between his statement and the Florida quarterback's actions here. The problem is, to take that seriously, you have to have shame, and Mullen has none. So therefore, he'll never acknowledge the fact that what he said about many people took to be a reference towards Kirby Smart and Justin Fields was just all hot air and bloviating and big talk, and he actually, in his own sense, is kind of violating his own principles. You'd have to have a sense of shame to be able to acknowledge that, and Mullen already has shown us that he doesn't have that. He's already shown us that his words aren't connected in any real way to any true sense of reality. This is a guy who's, essentially, it's almost like a pro wrestling thing. I love the word kayfabe, where like In the world of pro wrestling, kayfabe means you have to pretend that it's real, even if most people know that it's fake. And yes, even a pro wrestling fan like me understands that. Well, Mullen's like the most kayfabe coach in the entire SEC. He's going around saying a bunch of stuff that he knows is a work, that he knows is put on, that he knows is just for show, but he'll never acknowledge otherwise. So, yeah, Mullen here caught in kind of a hypocritical statement, but he'll never acknowledge that. Let me do a couple more quick stories here. Let me try to rattle through these. I want to hear from Kirby Smart in just a moment. I've kind of gone long just a little bit. Ed Orgeron had an interesting statement to make about why it was that they've had so much success recruiting wide receivers. He was on a Baton Rouge radio station. You'll probably are aware that LSU just got the commitment from five-star wide receiver Rakeem Jarrett, and he mentioned the wide-open offense that LSU is going to be using this year, even saying they're going to have some 4 and 5 wide receiver sets. And what I think is kind of ironic about that is one of the reasons why I'm high on LSU this season, I've seen some preseason, some of these way too early top 25s, that have LSU very near the top 5 right now. One of the reasons why I don't think that's an unrealistic expectation for LSU is not about the multiple wide receiver sets, the 4 receiver sets. It's about the running backs they've brought into the program. I think that John Emery Jr., who Georgia fans know well, Ty Davis, who Georgia fans may also remember from the recruiting trail, I think the freshman running backs are actually what's going to make the biggest impact for LSU this season. So I think it's interesting that Orgeron's talking up wide receivers. It's really running backs that I think could be a difference maker on the field for the Tigers this year. I saw where Jimbo Fisher also talked about the search for the brand new Texas A&M athletic director, essentially confirming what many people believe, which is that he wants some sort of say in who ultimately they're going to hire. He wants a good working relationship. And I understand why Texas A&M might want to do this. After all, you don't want to make Fisher mad and have him start looking around. But I would also acknowledge A&M to be very careful with this. College football coaches are short-term hires. Athletic directors should be a little more long-term than that. Be very, very careful about the coach handpicking an athletic director because, at least in a certain sense, good programs do have a little bit of an independent working between the athletic director who's supposed to raise money and the football coach who's supposed to be worried about winning games right now. I think that A&M needs to be very, very careful with this. You saw where Mike Griffith a little earlier mentioned what has kind of been a little bit of a bad NFL draft for the Big 12 once again. I thought the stats on this were actually pretty surprising. So for the 8th straight year, according to ESPN, the Big 12 tied or had the outright lead for the least amount of draft picks for a Power 5 conference. And, of course, Oklahoma had a bunch, and they had Kyler Murray going number 1 overall. Second year in a row they've done that. But they only had, 10 players drafted in the first 3 rounds of the draft altogether. 25, 26, I think, total. Yeah, 26 drafted in total. I'm sorry, that is not a Power 5 league playing at the same level the other leagues when you have that little draft success. So I think a little criticism of the Big 12 may be warranted on that. I was also going to do a little thing on Nick Saban, Alabama. I'm running short on time. Let me push that back for tomorrow, but I think there's some interesting stuff coming out of Tuscaloosa. We're going to need to talk about that in the days ahead. For now, though, let me make that your SEC through, because I want to get back to Kirby Smart here on DawgNation Daily. And one of the things we talked about during this portion of the show yesterday were those freshman linebackers, Kobe Dean and Nolan Smith, and the impact they could make for Georgia this season. And upon further review, I think it's probably fair to add another name into that discussion, another name into that mix, because after G-Day was over back on April the 20th, Kirby Smart had some really nice things to say about a Georgia safety, Lewis Seen, a big hitter, a guy that apparently had some wow plays during the spring. Here's what Kirby said about him.
He's an exciting player. He's probably behind from a learning curve standpoint because we teach a lot of defense to our secondary, and he's made some wow plays this spring. And that doesn't mean he's going to go out there and start. That means that he's competing for playing time. We're making him play both safety spots, which is probably more taxing on him, but that gives us the ability to play him at either spot if anybody gets injured. He's going to be competing with guys for playing time. I think where he's going to really show up is special teams because he is a very physical, likes contact. He's a hitter.
It's that last phrase that Kirby uses that leads me to a prediction. Kirby says he's a hitter. And in the day and age where some of that's not quite as allowed as it used to be back in the Greg Blue, Thomas Davis era, there is still some room for physicality in the world of college football. And Lewis Seen being a big hitter, I think is going to make him very popular. I think a lot of Georgia fans are going to really like what he brings to the table because he is going to separate would-be ball carriers or receivers from the football. I think that's going to be a really fun thing to watch, and it's a part of what I think is going to be a really deep safety competition. We know that J.R. Reed's a very good player. I'm expecting a pretty good season from Richard LeCounte. But Otis Reese, who's been here for a year, Lewis Seen, who's been here for spring practice, those guys working their way in and trying to fight for some playing time, that safety position, that competition there could be a really fun one to watch. So I can't wait for that. I've said it over and over that when it comes to freshmen, if you're playing on this year's Georgia defense, this is a different kind of position battle to win in years past. It's all luxury items because Georgia's got enough capable players just from the guys who are already on the roster. But if a Tyreek Stevenson comes in and earns some time at cornerback, even if it's limited time, if a Lewis Seen comes in, earns some time at safety, even if it's just limited time, if a Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith, Jermaine Johnson, if they're earning a bunch of time on the field with that front seven, that may be more than limited time. That says a lot about those guys as young men, as they're not just, as we've said, not just following the footsteps of other guys who looked similar to them. They're actually charting their own path, which is a cool thing to see. Also cool to remind you, speaking of Gator hating, which we did a little earlier in the show, it's now been 914 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. Love doing it every single day. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews is the one that you can trust to do all those things for you. They're the ones around DawgNation that we really love. Dari's a great college football guy. The whole staff there at R.S. Andrews, terrific, terrific folks. And so please let them know we said hello and reach out to them online at rsandrews.com. They will take really good care of you. All right, let me roll through here, and I'm going to try to take as many comments as we can today. I'm going to respond to the comments, of course, but I want to try to take as many as we can over the course of the program. James Bryant says, B.A., send me those nice headphones you're wearing. Mine are dying. So, yeah, James, I do like my headphones because y'all know I'm kind of an older guy. I don't like the newfangled stuff with like the noise canceling deal where your headphones have to have a battery. To me, that's just more trouble than it's worth for me. So these are just kind of like classic headphones, no noise canceling, no batteries required. They just plug in. And we got like a long cord. This cord's like probably 50 or 60 feet. This thing is in. But it's getting harder and harder to find just like basic good headphones. So I do kind of enjoy my headphones. Chris Branham says there was a troll in the comment section today. That's going to happen from time to time. Y'all know that. I mean, we have created a bit of a, of a spectacle around here at DawgNation. People are going to try to find with that. Rhodey Williams says, what's up with that big Gronk type tight end from Vegas? That's an interesting comparison for Darnell Washington. And I haven't heard any updates on Washington too much as of late, other than the last thing I heard was there were a lot of the sort of the national people, national recruiting experts that seem to think that Washington really likes Georgia. So, Rhodey, I'm hopeful for some good news on there. I don't think it's too much of a greed thing or too much of an exaggeration to say that Georgia could get Washington and get Rick Gilbert, two really good-looking tight ends of this 2020 class. I think that'd be fun. That'd be a blast. Jacob McMillan said it was an LSU troll, first LSU troll that he's seen in the comment section. Yeah, we've had the Tennessee guy occasionally, the Tech guy will stumble in here occasionally, Alabama guy every now and then. We've also, by the way, had a good crop of non-trollish fans that show up and just like to talk football. We always welcome everybody in that regard. But yeah, you're gonna have some troll type stuff from time to time. Timmy Taylor says, how likely do you see us losing both tackles and guards in the draft? As long as no injuries in a good year, I could see us losing all four. I think losing all four is a possibility. The one thing I don't know about is I don't know how frequently juniors leave as guards. They may leave all the time now. I don't know that. That's one of the things I'd have to do a little bit of research to be able to say one way or another. That would be Kinley's situation. He's actually he'll be a redshirt junior at the end of the year. But, do guards exhaust their full eligibility? I don't know that. I think that Kinley is almost for sure a guard at the NFL level. I sometimes wonder if Ben Cleveland might like to stay around for Georgia for one more year to give tackle a try. After all, coming out of high school, that's a position that I think we thought he would play. He has found himself a really good home at the right guard position for Georgia. And even though there was a lot of chatter about, Jamar Salyer getting some first-team reps, maybe Cade Mays occasionally getting some first-team reps there. I think that Cleveland's going to be the starter at that spot, but with another year of eligibility where he could return for 2020, I wonder if he might stick around and try to give tackle a shot to go be able to do that. But losing all four is at least a possibility. Sounds like Connor Riley wants to respond to this.
To hear Mike Griffith tell it, it sounds like Georgia's going to lose, 15 guys to the NFL draft next year. No?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you were to start ranking juniors that could leave, the offensive linemen would be the ones that I think would have, I guess, the strongest consideration. As I said before, do juniors with eligibility remaining who are guards, how often do they leave and go to the NFL draft?
Not very. Those guys are almost always 4-year guys.
I mean, I know that Richard LeCount showed up in one of these big boards the other day of potential guys that could do some things in the draft maybe next year. That seems like too much too soon for LeCount for me. If Georgia were to lose a junior off the 2019 team to the draft, to me it's more likely Stokes than LeCount. I don't know that it's definitely going to be either one, but
right. And
if I had to say one or the other, I'd say Stokes more so than LeCount because the NFL I think just values cornerbacks more than safeties anyway.
And Stokes has started 4 games, and rightfully so. I think a lot of people are high on him, but also I think projecting Eric Stokes as an NFL guy after 4 games is a little bit absurd.
Wait, say that one more time?
I think projecting Eric Stokes to be an NFL guy, a high NFL draft pick, because that's usually what we intend when we have guys leaving. No one thinks Eric Stokes is going to leave to be a 6th-round draft pick next year.
Yeah.
I think to put that on him after, he started 4 games last season, and he played a better part of some other ones. But
yeah, I certainly wouldn't project him to leave early right now. All I'll say is that
the vision.
Yeah, when he has played, he does the thing that NFL teams really want their guys to be able to do, which is when the ball is in the air, you go knock it out of the sky. He's really good at that, and I think that's one of the things that I think makes him the potential of a guy that could break out. And it's almost like the fact we haven't seen more of him makes him a little bit more of an interesting prospect because when someone plays longer, it's just a natural thing that you'll see what he does well and what he still needs to work on. And I'm sure that Stokes, like everybody else, has a kind of a wide-ranging variety of stuff like that. Let me pop over to YouTube here for a moment, too, and get a few comments there. How about Nate Patrick on Zamir White saying when he was, playing against us before he got hurt, that he was very hard to tackle, could not bring him down, that he was as electric as advertised. That does a lot for me, y'all. That really gets me ready to go. I'm very, very excited to hear that, for sure.
I mean, it doesn't sound any different than what a lot of other people have said about White when he's healthy and the kind of running back he is and can be. So, again, the question is, just how does he react and how does he, is he going to be thinking about, how are my knees feeling when he goes to make a cut? Or how do my knees feel when he takes that first real hit in a game? And, if he's able to put that out of his mind and just play football like he used to prior to the injuries, I think, Georgia's going to have a very good running back.
Yeah, I think that you're right. It's 2 issues. First issue is, before the injury, was he as good as advertised? And it sounds like, according to Nate Patrick, he was, and other people have kind of validated that same thing. And now it's what percentage of that do you get in 2019? On subjects like that, I find myself overall pretty optimistic because, y'all, I mean, I'm 42, I've been a sports fan for a long time. While I don't understand medical technology, I am amazed at how medical technology has advanced to the point where I guess I just don't take injuries as serious as I used to because of the degree to which people seem to recover from these things really, really fast and aggressively. And, in the case of a Nick Chubb or a Zamir White, their own personal tenacity seems to help with that. But also the current just medical know-how seems to be a big part of this too. So when it comes to if the only thing holding back Zamir White is injury, then I'm assuming he's going to be fine because it seems like most of these guys are pretty fine there in that regard. Dennis Wilson actually said something nice about me for a change in the YouTube comment section. He says, "BA, you're a young buck, sir." Well, I appreciate that, Dennis. I'm glad to hear you say that. G. Grace, I don't know what G. Grace is talking about. Brian McPhail says it usually takes 2 years to fully recover from knee surgeries. That may be true, but the point here is what is in between the fully recovered. I'll go back to Nick Chubb in 2016. who, other than like a few runs in that North Carolina game, I think we would all say he was not the same guy in 2016 that he was in 2017, but that was still like 1,100 yards rushing. If memory serves, it was almost 1,060. Is that about what Chubb had in 2016? Almost 1,100 yards. So you don't need Zamir White to be your leading rusher, but is there a chance that he pushes Brian Herring to be the number 2 rusher on this team? Or is there a chance that Herring's good enough that you don't quite have the classic Chubb, Michelle, Swift, Holyfield tandem, that you actually have more of a trio because of the fact that Herring's good enough and White's still working his way back, that you split carries kind of among 3 backs? It seems like in the SEC you had a period of time where a lot of teams did that. Unfortunately, Tennessee, I think, did that to great success in the late 90s. I think Florida did that for a while. Maybe this is one of those deals where, Georgia's sharing between a trio of backs, and it's not quite that Batman and Robin or, Crockett and Tubbs, whatever your favorite duo in history is. Maybe it's not quite that type of thing, but it's more of a three, kind of a 3-headed monster deal. Croking 123 says, we need Zion Logue, Timon Mitchell, and especially Trayvon Walker to come in and live up to the hype. Yeah, but for all 3 of those guys, I don't know what I expect from freshman defensive linemen. Between that 3, and Trayvon's going to do a lot of great things for Georgia in a Georgia uniform, but because of his expected level of play being kind of more elevated and somewhat more spectacular, he may have the longest learning curve of them all, because it's not like he was brought to Georgia simply to use his size. For a guy like Timon Mitchell, they may be less to learn. Just go out there and be big and clog up space and occupy blockers. It's probably a little easier to learn. I'm oversimplifying the position, of course, but you get the overall point.
To Croking's point there, you need one of those guys to step up, I think.
Yeah,
I think it's realistic for one of those 3 to potentially emerge as a guy, but all 3 of them emerging is just a little hard to see, just in terms of, all 3 of them are going to have to leap all the guys ahead of them on the depth chart to do.
Yeah, I mean,
honestly, it just seems like a stretch.
As high as I am on Trayvon Walker, and I've said before, he may be the best overall prospect of the entire Georgia roster. Of the 3 that you just mentioned, a big impact as a freshman, Timon Mitchell may be the one that's the most critical there, because that he is the other guy that can do some Jordan Davis type stuff for you. Georgia needs to have somebody when Davis is spent, when if Davis gets hurt, they need to have somebody that can really provide that. And gosh, I don't really know who that other nose guard would be right now that really steps in there and stops the run. And the way that Jordan Davis is capable of doing it, a guy like Mitchell kind of coming in and following in those footsteps, he may be that guy. Joshua Simmons says, BA, Georgia Tech fans were trolling UGA because of the recruiting rankings. They are loaded with 3 stars. So I will say this, and I'll say this one time. Jeff Collins is out recruiting some SEC coaches right now. Now, he's not anywhere near being a threat to Georgia as of yet, nor do I think he ever will be. But Jeff Collins is going to cause a lot of trouble for a lot of programs in the border neighboring states around Georgia that like to come into the Atlanta area and get some recruits. I mean, it's laughable to think that Tech is in any way on par or even a threat to Georgia when it comes to recruiting. But in terms of being a threat to the rest of the Southeast, as it stands right now, Collins is actually doing a pretty good job. I've got no real snark for Collins right now. He's doing what Tech should have done a long time ago.
I have snark.
All right, please, by all means.
Georgia Tech's army of 3 stars, just 3-star by 3-star, just building it up. And, for the Georgia fans being worried, let's wind the clock back 2 years. That 2018 class. Georgia was in the 60s around this time in 2017 going into the 2018 signing day. Georgia finished with the number 1 class that year. Recruiting is a marathon. It is not a half marathon. It's not a 5K. It is a full 26-mile race.
Well, the other thing, too, is for the last couple of years, I mean, ever since that thing went down, because, listen, it was no put on. It was no joke. Sitting here, it was a different studio back then, but it was still on video. This is actually in the video age of DawgNation Daily. That summer, when Georgia was just getting beaten up for recruits, and I hate to say this, but honesty compels me to admit, taking some commitments from some players who I was like,
army of 3 stars.
How does this guy fit into Georgia? I'm not quite sure what's going on here. I mean, and at least one of those cases, 3 stars may have been a little bit of a generous description of at least one of those recruits. I was pretty worried. I was pretty worried because what it seemed like to me at the time was that, Kirby Smart could get the number 3 class in the country back in 2017 because he had all this early playing time to sell, and you could say, hey, we're weak here, come in here and play. All of a sudden now the roster's a little deeper, and you don't have as much early playing time to sell, so you're not really sure what else you do have to sell. But that just wasn't the case. I'm going to give Jeff Sintel a ton of credit for this. That summer, he came on the show, and this was in the darkest part of that, as Connor said, like 60-something, 70-something in the country. In that darkest part of that ranking, Jeff came on the show, and I still have the audio clip. He said, a lot of the coaches hear this, and I'm being told that they laugh at what y'all are saying. That not in a mean-spirited way, but just laughing and saying, y'all don't know what is coming. And what's significant about that is this was before the 2017 season happened on the field. That a lot of people would tell you, well, Georgia ended up being number 1 in recruiting because they went to the Rose Bowl, went to the college football playoff. But according to Jeff, and Jeff ended up being right about this, so you have to take this seriously. According to Jeff, Georgia coaches were already laughing about the people who were really worried about Georgia recruiting, even when they were ranked like 60 whatever in the country in recruiting. They knew they were going to put a class together, and it just so happens that the perfect storm occurred. As they were putting that class together, they were also, about to be really good in the field and everything else. But the Georgia coaches kind of already had their plan in play. So my point is, ever since that moment, I have adjusted my thinking on UGA recruiting. Now, I still complain about individual position groups from time to time because I do think there's probably room to do that. But I only look at average recruiting rank, like average value of the individual players that Georgia brings in. The actual rankings themselves, given the fact that Georgia has fewer recruits and fewer commits than other programs do, that doesn't mean a whole lot to me. It's the average rating of the player that Georgia brings in, and that is as high as anyone right now.
And right now, I believe Georgia is 4th in terms of average rating per recruit.
Yeah, and that's fine for me right now. Santiago Diarn says, any thoughts? Santiago lives out in the Midwest. He says, let me find him here. He says, any thoughts on 610 Sports KC's Ron Hughley asking whether or not Jake Fromm is special? That not shown to be a first-round quarterback and is a disappointment. Really love your thoughts. So, Santiago, I think you shared that with me on Twitter. I saw a little bit of that and saw some of the reaction to that. I've been kind of behind on some of my Twitter mentions, unfortunately. But what I said about Fromm during the regular show today is what I think that Fromm really is as a quarterback. Fromm is incredibly accurate, and that really matters. 9 yards per attempt, nearly 68% completion percentage on his passes. That's a pretty big deal. And ultimately, that's the kind of stuff the NFL is probably looking for, and they are probably willing to tolerate some of the other stuff that's maybe imperfect about Fromm because athletically, he's less athletic than Kyler Murray. He's less athletic than Baker Mayfield probably. He's less athletic than some of these guys who have been recently drafted, near the top of the NFL draft. Fromm's probably less athletic than Tua Tagovailoa. He probably is. But NFL teams are looking for guys that can throw the ball into a tight window. I think that Fromm has shown the ability to do that. Now, I'll also add to that, there are certain tight windows I want to see him throw into more this season, but that's really more about helping Georgia than it is, evaluating as a pro prospect. Because ultimately, I wish him well in the NFL, but my brand of football is played on Saturdays. That's what matters to me more. But, if you go look at the top of the stats for, who had the highest completion percentage and who had the highest yards per attempt a year ago, it's the Dwayne Haskins, it's the Kyler Murrays, it's the quarterbacks that you think it would be. These are not Mickey Mouse stats. These are, for the most part, very definitive stats, for who goes to the top of the draft. Now, they're not all NFL guys, like Gardner Minshew is up there, for instance, but Minshew played lights out last season for Washington State. Even if he's not, a huge NFL name, that's still a guy that had great college success. Fromm is near the top in some stats that really, really matter. I will say, Santiago, the other thing I'm really curious about is, can Fromm take 9 and turn it into 10 in terms of yards per attempt? Can he add that much to what he's already done? Because he's really been at about 9, I want to say, for the last couple of years, 2017 and 2018. Can 68 turn into 71? Can you find a way to juice those numbers a little bit more? That's kind of the difference between Fromm and Kyler Murray or Fromm and Tua Tagovailoa. Now, Tua did some of that against weaker defenses than some of the better ones that Fromm played against in November, but Tua was like 11 yards per attempt last year. Fromm was about 9. Now, you say, what's the difference between 2 yards? Over the course of a full season, 2 yards on every single throw, that really adds up. Completion percentage kind of the same way. So ultimately, these quarterbacks are going to be poked and prodded. But as long as Fromm remains as accurate as he has been, that's what the NFL teams are going to really like, because as we said on yesterday's R.S. Andrews cool down, that's the one thing a lot of coaches don't feel like you can instill in a quarterback. That you can do those, footwork ladder drills and maybe get a little bit better with that. But in terms of the ability to hit a receiver in between a cornerback and safety, either you have that or you don't.
What do you make of Mike's comments that Jake Fromm needs to win, quote unquote, the big one to sort of validate being a top 10 draft pick?
Yeah, we talked about this on the regular show yesterday. Success in college football hasn't always correlated as much with draft success as I probably would like for it to. So I don't think in any way, form, or fashion that Fromm beating Alabama is going to make him more attractive to NFL draft teams. They just drafted Daniel Jones 6th overall in this league. So if that would be the case, Daniel Jones would be holding on field goals. So I don't.
That seems like a bit much. Daniel Jones lost his last game to Wake Forest,
like 56-3 or something like that.
Yeah, 59-7.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think winning in college and being drafted in the NFL is as strongly correlated as I would like for it to be. Obviously, I really, really hope that Fromm wins in college regardless, but I don't think that's what the NFL teams are necessarily looking for. But I do think that, look, these GMs in the NFL are very well paid. These are good jobs. They don't want to get fired. And I think they go into every draft thinking, what can I do that won't get me fired? Jake Fromm has "I won't get you fired" written all over him. And I ultimately think that's another thing that NFL GM's going to really like. A guy that does not throw a lot of picks, that's not going to be, in a pool on a swan at any point in time, that he's not going to have, some weird photo pop up on him. I think ultimately that's what teams are going to really like about him.
I think, a lot of people have thrown out the Drew Brees comparison with him.
That's the highest of the high end.
I think going into next year, he is going to be, to the team that drafts him, he's going to be, coming into the league, he's going to be an Andy Dalton that you feel good about, that you feel like the best parts of Andy Dalton, who, say what you want about him, he did get the Bengals to multiple playoff appearances and is a very quality starter. I think going into the league, that is what Fromm's floor is going to be.
I've got 2 really good comments I want to read here, but I agree with that. Here's the one thing that someone like me, who's not like an NFL obsessive, here's the one thing that guys like me forget all the time. That if you could draft the next Andy Dalton, that would be a good pick virtually with any pick in the first round, including number 1 overall. That if you don't have a quarterback and you can get a dependable starter for like the next 8 or 9 years, even if it's quote-unquote just Andy Dalton, or to use a name a little closer to home, just Matthew Stafford, if you can get a quarterback that you can pencil in as a starting quarterback for 8 or 9 years, that's a really good pick at any position whatsoever. And by position, I mean any position of the draft, any spot in the draft whatsoever. That's a really strong value. Let me do Hiku Moon and Matt Rukavina here on Facebook. Hiku says, which team poses the greatest threat to our journey to the college football playoff this year? I think it's a really great question. And in some form or fashion, we'll wrestle with this a lot over the course of the next couple months, really. And my answer to this question is undoubtedly, I don't have to hesitate to say it, it is Auburn. On the road.
You've been on that bandwagon.
On the road. And I'm not saying that Auburn's going to beat Georgia. That's not what I'm saying. I would not pick that to happen. But in terms of what could really, really be a tough deal for Georgia to, in terms of trying to be undefeated in the regular season to the extent that's going to matter, on the road at Auburn, I think is really tough. Hiku, the thing I would also add to that is, we kind of talked about this yesterday, but maybe I didn't say it as clearly as I could have. What's frustrating for me as a fan is that on a neutral field, I reckon Georgia is a point spread favorite and maybe a sizable favorite over every team in the country but 2. I mean, I'm guessing Georgia's even probably a field goal touchdown favorite, something in between that over Ohio State right now. They're probably Oklahoma, maybe, probably a little bit. I think they would have been a favorite against Oklahoma had they played last year in a neutral field. But the point is, the two teams that Georgia would not be favored against, one of them, it almost certainly has to beat to get the college football playoff. Because if it's Georgia versus Alabama in the SEC championship, and if it's another nail-biter, and if it's another game in which Alabama, who's a slight favorite, wins in sort of late, close fashion, I think Georgia's going to get excluded from the playoff again, whether it's one of the four best teams or not. I just think it's going to happen again. So as much as I want to talk about the dangers of going on the road at Auburn, Georgia lost that game in 2017, still made the playoff. It's the fact that the team that you've been trying to get better than, at least on paper, would still appear to be a little better than you. That is also a big part of this to talk about, is that Georgia will not be, as it stands right now, a point spread favorite on a neutral field against Alabama nor Clemson. And this year that's supposed to be the year for Georgia, it might have to win 2 games as an underdog to win the national championship. And that's a really hard thing to do.
I agree.
Matt Rukavina also talked on that same subject. Our buddy Barrett Slee was on the Fine Bomb show yesterday. Where'd Barrett? Where'd Matt's comment go? So Barrett basically said that Georgia's got an offensive line that's good enough they could win the national championship. We all know that's true. I mean, I don't think any of us denying that. If Georgia wins the national championship this year, I would say that the offensive line is the main reason why. With all due respect to what could be an improved defense, more exciting defense, Georgia's offensive line is the reason why it will or won't win a national championship, I believe. Actually, it won't be the reason why it won't, but if it gets over the hump, it's just because it just leans on this group all year long. Because once those guys start blocking other teams' defensive linemen, I think we're all going to be reminded of one more time just exactly how good that group really is. So,
and conversely, I know a lot of people are high on Clemson, rightfully so, with the wide receivers and Trevor Lawrence and just the infrastructure they have there. They lost a lot on their offensive line and on their defensive line. And I do think at some point this year that is going to matter. Now, obviously, they've recruited extremely well on the defensive line, not quite as much so on the offensive line. But when you have a guy like Lawrence, that does mitigate some of that.
Yeah, I think the Clemson pass rush is still going to be really good. I don't know how great they are at stopping the run with what they've lost, but in terms of getting after quarterbacks again, Xavier Thomas and KJ Henry, a lot of these names, my guess is they're still really, really good.
Yeah, as good as they'll be on the outside, Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence, there's a reason they went in the first round because they were very, very good against the run. And Clemson, doesn't have one-to-one replacements at those positions like they do at, the edge positions. So, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Clemson, maybe drop a game or two in the regular season this year. Maybe Syracuse gets them up in the Carrier Dome. It's a place they've struggled. I mean, the problem is just the rest of the ACC is just in the trash can right now.
Yeah,
so.
but you talk about getting me fired up. If Clemson loses, I think they should be excluded from the playoff conversation.
Oh, come on.
Excluded from the playoff conversation. I mean, Connor, the ESPN FBI stuff, the extent we take any of this kind of stuff seriously, they have Clemson's strength of schedule right now ranked outside the top 50. I believe Clemson's a really good team. But you know what? Georgia's a really good team last year, too. Sometimes when you lose a game, you get punished for it. And I think that it would fair is a loaded word. It's the kind of thing that children use, so maybe I shouldn't use it. But
like ketchup.
Yeah, very good. Fair is like ketchup. It's only for children. But it would be totally unfair to take a team that plays, cupcake after cupcake after cupcake, then Texas A&M, then a bunch of cupcakes, and then say, well, if you lose a game, that's okay because you're the reigning national champion. You still get the free kiss into the college football playoff. I'll be losing my mind for that, and I've said this a million times. My point on this is unequivocal, whatever the word is. Clemson is an elite team, but it is an elite team helped by an easy schedule. But if they can't manage the easy schedule, I don't care if they're an elite team or not. You're going to do what Georgia did last year, which is sit and watch the playoff if I had my way.
I think Clemson might get the quote-unquote benefit of the doubt, that even if they do lose just one game, they lose 2, they won't be in. We still haven't seen, eventually maybe we do see a 2-loss team in. But I think, until that happens, it's going to be hard to justify putting in a 2-loss team. I think if Clemson only has 1 loss on the record and they still win the ACC, I think a lot of people are going to be willing to give them the benefit of the doubt based on what they've done in the past. And again, to your point, that's not fair, but that's just the reality that we happen to live in.
You are very likely right, but for those of you who like to see me get worked up on the show, you better believe I am going to be very worked up on that day. And Connor, I know you're not a big pro wrestling fan, but much of our audience is. This is the same way that pro wrestling works. It's the so-called champion's advantage where you can't lose the title by disqualification or a count out. There is a champion's advantage in college football that when you've been in the playoff before, you do get the extra look. And as much as the Rubes want to say, oh, it's only about this season, we know that's not the case. We know that Alabama gets a second look as a non-SEC champion in a way that Georgia just doesn't quite get that. It's a champion's advantage. We know that Clemson probably would get that champion's advantage, but just because it's so, don't make it right. And you better believe that might be the deal there. Let me get Cliff Payne, who says, actually, I'm going to get a couple comments from Cliff, and then Connor, I'll let you say what you wanted to say. Cliff says, LSU's the team to watch this year. They will be very, very good. I do believe that LSU is going to be really good. And for those of you who remember last year's offseason conversation, that's in a big about face for me. I was down on Orgeron going into last year, but on the recruiting trail and on the field, LSU has showed me a lot. Listen, LSU had nothing to play for against UCF, and UCF seemingly had everything to play for in its bowl game. So as much as I'm part of this group too, we kind of like to sweep that Sugar Bowl loss to Texas under the rug because it didn't matter. Well, LSU's bowl game didn't matter either, but they still won.
Yep.
Orgeron's done some coaching there at LSU, which I think is kind of interesting. So I do think they'll be good, but that's only a problem for Georgia if you get to the SEC championship.
I do see the points on LSU, and I see why people might like them. Bring in a guy like John Emery Jr., that defense is always going to be very good, even if it does lose a little bit of star power. You got to play close with Alabama. Not even, necessarily beat them, but you have to at least show me if I'm going to start believing in LSU and being back to what they were in the early Les Miles days. You have to be at least able to hang with LSU and score points. They haven't scored a point on Alabama since 2016.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that Alabama seems to be really good at when it plays LSU is playing in such a way where it knows it can't lose. You know what I'm saying? It's like that's the one game of the year where seemingly Alabama's not going for style points. A couple years ago, it won 10-0, for instance. It's just it seems to know that it can lean a little heavier, be a little bigger, be a little tougher, be a little meaner, and that's where Alabama has beaten LSU the last few years. They haven't all been, just walloping affairs. I guess at least one or two of them recently have been, but they haven't all been that way. But they have been, just like even the game in Baton Rouge this past year, the final score ends up making that look, pretty profound. If LSU could have just completed one or two passes, they could have been in that football game. But Alabama ultimately knows we're just going to, like an anaconda, we're just going to, just choke the life out of you. And that's basically what they've chosen to do to LSU the last couple of years. I had another comment I was going to read, and I can't remember
I have a question, and commenters, feel free to weigh in, because I reading them, I'm getting a sense, So let's say LSU does beat Alabama this year, and would you rather...
It's a great question. I think I know what you're about to ask, and this is a really good question. As
a Georgia fan, would you rather just win the SEC, or would you rather see Saban in the SEC championship game and beat Saban? Is beating Saban going and getting the college football? Let's say Georgia wins the national title. Let's put that out there, making it already a special season. Does beating Saban add anything extra?
It does for me. It does for me, and I know a lot of Georgia fans are going to disagree with that. There are a lot of Georgia fans that say, "BA, you got to keep your eye on the ball." This is not about personal vendettas. This is about trying to get some hardware, and I totally get where you're coming from on all that. I really appreciate all of that. If you told me right now I could have the SEC championship feature LSU, which almost objectively is an easier game to play, I think I would turn down that offer right now.
Comment section agrees.
I want to see Georgia beat Alabama.
They want to see and beat Alabama.
I want to see Georgia beat Alabama. Y'all know how these dingbat Bama fans are. They'll be like, "Well, you didn't beat us." Blah 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 blah. I don't want to listen to that. Mm-hmm. Georgia needs to beat Alabama. Georgia needs to do that. And so if you gave me the chance right now to play LSU, which on a neutral field would be a very different game than it was last year in Baton Rouge, even with an easier opponent, Georgia almost for sure be on a neutral field a favorite against LSU. I still want to see Georgia vanquish this foe that hasn't vanquished yet. And
Georgia's got to win the Great War before it wins the last war.
Yeah, there you go. Winston Mock agrees. He says must beat Saban. I think that at this point in time, it's just a symbolic thing. And the fact that somebody else has beaten Saban recently doesn't change any of that for me. The fact that Clemson has done that does not, I'm going to use another big word I probably shouldn't use. Is it obfuscate? Is that a word?
That's way too big for my dictionary.
I don't think that obfuscates Georgia from its obligation to go out and do this thing. I just don't think it does. I don't. Frank DiCarlo says nothing better than watching Saban scream and come unglued on the sideline. We need to finish that drill. Yeah, Frank, I don't know if you're as old as I am, but, one of the great memories of my childhood was Mike Tyson when he got knocked out by Buster Douglas. And in this comparison, Georgia's no Buster Douglas. But, the point I'm making, when Tyson's down on the ground and he's looking for his mouthpiece, this is the guy who was like legitimately the baddest man on the planet, and Buster Douglas had whooped him so bad that Tyson couldn't even find his mouthpiece to put it back in. It was this unbelievable, moment of humanity, of like, oh my gosh, this is a real human being after all. The fictional version of that is the Russian is cut, right? The Ivan Drago, when he first
he bleeds.
Yeah, when Rocky first drew blood and the announcer says the Russian is cut. And Georgia needs to have that moment against Alabama. And they've seemingly had Alabama on the ropes, but that moment where you realize Tyson's not getting up, the count's going to continue long as it was, and Tyson's not going to get up. Georgia needs to have that against Alabama, and that's going to be a very, very, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say spiritual moment for me when it does indeed go down.
I think it's going to be just relief. Just relief that it's over.
Yeah.
Just satisfaction.
Ken Feinberg says, it'll be like the Steve Spurrier moment where he's throwing that visor. Yeah, I mean, obviously Georgia finally got its measure of retribution against Spurrier in 2015 in a very different kind of game and a very different kind of season. But there is that moment where you say, hey, you do vanquish that foe. It's going to be an incredible moment. James Bryan also brings up the Down Goes Frazier stuff. That is one of those things that I am not old enough to have seen live anyway, the Ali Frazier fights. I've seen a lot of them on video. If you're younger than a lot of us who are talking right now, especially Connor's age, the fight you got to go back and watch on YouTube, and I'm sure the whole thing's available on YouTube, is Hagler Hearns. Have you seen Hagler Hearns?
I've only heard about it.
Hagler Hearns is short. It doesn't take very long to watch. If you're, interested in boxing, the Hagler Hearns couple minutes of that fight, that's the kind of stuff that, listen, all the UFC guys and that kind of stuff, I don't think there's anything in UFC that rivals what Hagler Hearns was like in the 80s when they're just going at it. Just really, really good stuff. Matt Rukavina says Bama doesn't like being pushed around. They out-finessed us. It is kind of funny. They have become a little bit more of a finesse team as of late. Even their pass rush. Quentin Williams seemingly, used speed as a pass rusher a lot last year. This is a little bit more of a finesse team than it once was. When you look at what really hurt Georgia against Alabama, it's not so much the bruising running game as it was Jalen Waddle, this very, very fast receiver, very tough to tackle. That's not a criticism of Alabama, but they have added that extra dimension. I think they also have the other component too, which makes them really dangerous. But this is not the same Alabama team, the same type of team that Georgia started off trying to be. When Georgia first set its sights on Alabama, the Alabama that was there then, in terms of what it's evolved into,
the one that ended Mark Rick's, at the end of that 2015 game, where it wasn't the speed. It was just they straight up just punked and pushed around Georgia in the mud for 3 hours that day.
Yeah, that's a really good example. That's what Alabama was. Now what it's kind of evolved into of just very different programs. Ray Brandon says if we beat Bama, the beast will be unleashed and Georgia will be unstoppable. I guess, and I don't mean to be negative, but it also brings to mind this of what if Georgia gets over that foe and still comes up short of a national championship?
I still think it's special.
I do too.
I still think so you beat Bama, you get to the playoff. That's still a successful season for Georgia.
I think that.
I know Florida fans will, do the 1980, but beating Bama, I believe they'd be the first team to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game since Florida did it back in 2008. So over a decade.
Yeah.
I do think that would be still qualify as a special season.
I think I would agree with that. Let me also add, Brandon Pratt says Josh Jacobs shredded our defense, BA. Obviously, the Alabama running game is still formidable, but going into that game, the thing that I think we spent the most time talking about, I think Georgia spent the most time being concerned about was, how not to give up those big dynamic passing plays. And in a lot of ways, what opened up for the Alabama running game a year ago was what the passing game was able to do. I'm not denying that Jacobs was a very good player. I just think that, when you were talking about the stuff from Alabama that you were really afraid of, it was that passing game probably more so than anything else.
Lee Bridges on YouTube says he doesn't want a national title if Georgia doesn't beat Alabama. And I think I think if you gave Georgia fans the dream sequence, they do beat Alabama to get to that title.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not telling you I wouldn't take one no matter what. I mean, listen, if you told me that every player that Georgia plays this year is going to be, not that I would ever wish injuries, but I'll take a championship however I can get one. Star player injured, Ole Miss wins the SEC West. If it means a championship, I'll take it however I can get, because 100 years from now they all look the same. But in terms of the actual moment, the specialness of beating big-time foes is really more important than anything else. And really, not to get all philosophical, but that's what makes college football special. That it's not just the, hey, so-and-so won a title. It's these, to go back to the Ali Frazier stuff, the great line about that the third time they fought was two men fighting for the championship of each other. There is still some of that in college football where it's not just the national championship, the SEC championship. It's that team against team showdown just to be the champion of each other that really matters. And, you can get that in college football in a way that's also separate from the actual championships that are on the line. All right, let's do a couple more on YouTube.
Ray Brandon, I changed my answer. I would rather play LSU in the SEC championship game and beat Bama in the national championship game.
Well, if that be the case, you'd probably be doing that, because if it sounds like you're replicating 2017 with the different Tigers in the SEC title game, and my guess is Alabama would get that benefit of the doubt. I'm guessing they would get in the playoff, and you may have to do that. I don't want to have to play Alabama twice. I don't want to do that. I don't want to play anybody twice. I mean, in college basketball, where you see a lot of rematches, both in season and sometimes with the season going to the postseason, the team that lost game one wins game two more than 50% of the time. And by the way, that's true even when the game one winner was won by a sizable amount. That it's just, statistically, it's just hard to beat the same team two times in a row. I'm guessing if we did a statistical analysis of this, in the NFL, sometimes you say it's hard to beat the same team three times in a row. My guess is that's not as much true, because once you beat them twice, you're just proving that you're clearly better than they are. But I'm guessing if we did a statistical analysis, beating the same team twice is actually harder than beating the same team three times. I don't know that I'm right about that, but I'm gonna guess that if we did some math on that, we might find that to be true. What else we got?
See, I think I prefer to beat Bama in the SEC championship game and then take down Clemson in the title game. You win the conference one, you keep Alabama out, and I think that strengthens Georgia's theoretical grip on the SEC. And then you make a statement by beating Clemson in the national title game and saying we are a national program.
This is another thing that it's amazing how much this has changed over the course of a couple of years. In 2017, at the end of that season, Georgia's playing Oklahoma, and then later on that night, Alabama's playing Clemson. I don't really remember what I was thinking before that game. I think I just sort of thought it was amazing enough that Georgia was in the playoff that I wasn't really thinking beyond that. And, getting by Oklahoma was going to be enough of a challenge of its own. I think I was just so fixated on that. But the one thing I'm pretty sure I was not thinking is, boy, I can't wait to give Clemson a dose of what they got coming. I don't remember thinking that at all. I had no beef with Clemson whatsoever. And this is just like 2 years ago. I feel like I didn't have a single complaint about Clemson at all. They didn't matter to me one way or another. Deshaun Watson, who had been their quarterback, was a Gainesville kid, so I don't say I liked Clemson, but I mean I liked Deshaun. I was happy to see him have success. I didn't have any kind of gripe with Clemson whatsoever. In 2 years, all of a sudden now I feel like it's a personal mission to see Dabo Swinney taken down a peg and to see this Clemson program take some of the air out of that balloon. It is really amazing how things can change so much in just a couple of years. There is now an opponent that I want to see Georgia beat as badly as I want to see it beat Alabama. Clemson very, very quickly has become one of those kinds of teams for me. Jacob Thompson says Saban is scared of Kirby. He goes home and clutches those pearls tightly, thinking of Kirby. I mean, the Alabama fans don't like when I say this, but there's no doubt in my mind that Saban views Kirby as a different kind of foe than any other that he's dealt with in the SEC. Dabo's kind of carved out his own thing. Dabo's actually beaten, Saban, which he needs to get a lot of credit for, especially having done it more than once. So Dabo gets his credit for that. But within the SEC, there have been a lot of would-be challengers to Saban. Even someone like Urban Meyer, who pre-existed Saban in the SEC, at least at Alabama. Meyer turned tail and ran in 2010. He didn't stick around very long. Les Miles wilted by comparison. Ed Orgeron hasn't proven himself to be a formidable foe to Alabama as of yet. Kirby hasn't won the games head-to-head, but there's no doubt in my mind that Kirby has created the kind of thing that Saban notices in a way that no other SEC coach in Saban's time in Alabama has been close to being able to do. Even, a guy like, say, Hugh Freeze that beat, Saban twice at Ole Miss was not really, was not really a real threat, a real foe. All right. Grun D says, imagine BA's face after Bama. Thanks, Grun. Appreciate that. Thanks for the kind words.
Feels like the trolls are a little more chirpy today than usual.
Maybe so. Blind Squirrel Sports says, how much improved will UGA basketball be next year? Looking forward to watching Crean get things looking at the Stegman Coliseum. So, Connor, I feel like your tune kind of changed on this over the course of the last few weeks. My memory is you went from thinking that Anthony Edwards would not lead Georgia to the NCAA tournament, now thinking that he will. Do you think that Georgia's a tournament team in basketball next year?
Oh, I've gone the other way. I thought, assuming Edwards gets to play with Nick Claxton, Rayshawn Hammonds, etc., I think they can be an NCAA tournament team. But, unless he really is James Harden, we've seen that if you're not on a team that's as equally as talented as that superstar or five-star freshman, it can be hard to have success. And I worry just about putting too much too soon for this Georgia team. I think if it's an LSU type situation where, okay, you land Ben Simmons and it just doesn't go well, but, you start recruiting well, and unfortunately it looks like LSU was recruiting well because they were just throwing out bundles of cash to guys. But, I think it'll be an important process for Georgia, in that they can use this year to build and say, hey, we're making progress, we're sending guys to the NBA. Even if we're not necessarily making the tournament, we're building towards that, and you can come here and push us over the hump. So that's why I think, I have changed my tune a little bit on, saying Georgia has to make the NCAA tournament for this year to be a success. I think Georgia just has to show improvement as a whole, as a program, for this year to be a success.
And I'm actually a little bit different on that, because I'm a little skeptical they're going to make the tournament, but just because I think the SEC is pretty good right now. And, I don't know that freshmen make, historically speaking, a tremendous impact. But, and I think that if we look back on this 5 years from now, I think I'll be proven right. If Georgia is fun to watch this year, I think that could go a long way towards changing the way that Georgia fans view the program. Georgia basketball, unfortunately, and I say this as a basketball fan, I grew up as a big college basketball fan. We don't talk college basketball a ton on this program just because the majority of the audience wants football. But I grew up as a very big college basketball fan, and I have noticed that over the course of years, it's just been easy for fans of UGA to ignore basketball. Even in times when Georgia was good, there was still the opportunity to ignore it. But if Anthony Edwards, to the tune of being a potential number one overall pick in the NBA draft, if he's coming out here and doing a bunch of dunks, and he's got kind of a magnetic personality, I think if he's engaging and having a good time, as long as Georgia's competitive and as long as Georgia's playing a fun brand of basketball to watch, I think that Edwards will leave Georgia better off than he found it. I've always felt like this is more about the kinds of recruits that Edwards opens the door for you to get, more so than anything else. The other thing that hangs over the head of the Edwards discussion for me is, I don't follow all this that closely, but it certainly seems like there's a chance that Edwards is the last crop of one-and-done players. What does recruiting look like if the one-and-done faucet gets turned off?
Well,
I honestly don't know.
I mean, the one-and-done, it's probably not going to get – it's probably still a part of college basketball until the 2022 season. So we've got a few more of that. But to your point, and this point has been made, guys as talented as Edwards don't come along, period, very often, much less to a school like Georgia. And Chris Branham on Facebook, if Georgia doesn't qualify for the tournament, he believes it'll be a disappointment, and it'll be a long time. If Georgia gets a guy as good and as potentially program changing as Edwards.
And that's fair, but what I would caution you on, though, is if you look at what the Auburn team used to get the Final Four this year, that was a lot of contributing players, a lot of three-star type recruits. That was kind of a team concept. It wasn't built around one star.
Their best players were not the four stars and 5 stars that they brought in. Their best players were 3-star guys who developed over the course of the program.
I mean, you mentioned James Harden a moment ago. He went to Arizona State. Is that right? I mean, did Harden take Arizona State to the tournament? I don't remember.
I don't think he did.
So I mean, we're talking about a guy that's an NBA MVP level player, and for a guy like Connor that's watching a lot of college basketball, no memory comes up of Arizona State in the NCAA tournament. That's just a little bit of context for sometimes even for very good players. It's not always.
Harden wasn't a one and done, and he did take them. They did win the Pac-12 in his time at Arizona State, but Kevin Durant lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament to a Nick Young-led USC team.
And Texas lost a ton of regular season games that year, a ton of regular season games.
So.
Miriam Martin Corbin, a funny line, she says, when I was in college, the joke was the quietest place to study was the Coliseum when George was playing basketball. And, that's a pretty funny one, and I've kind of heard that before. The other thing I heard about, kind of a bygone era of Georgia basketball was, this predates Miriam, but supposedly when Pistol Pete Maravich, who many of you have heard of, when he came with LSU, he played such a good game against Georgia that the Georgia students carried him off the court. If you want to give you an idea of what Georgia basketball has been forced to overcome, I don't know if that story's true or not, but I heard that Georgia students once carried Pistol Pete off the court. Robert Barnes says about the Dogs being the only team to have 3 wide receivers drafted this year. And I guess what? A receiver drafted in each of the last 5 NFL drafts? That's one of those stats that does not seem right, but I guess is true, dating back to Chris Conley's time with the Chiefs. 3 drafted this year. There's clearly, a lot of talent that has been in that room. I mean, I still believe that Georgia's got to find its great receiver, and with all due respect to Ridley and Hardman and Godwin, they never quite became that, either because Georgia didn't use them properly or because those guys, for whatever reason, were just south of that threshold. But Georgia's had a collection of good receivers, and I think at some point in time they got to find their great receiver too. All right, we're going to go here. What else we got? Anything else on YouTube? Chime Dog says the college football conference. Let me read Chime here. He says, actually, I don't see it, but I think he was saying that the conference championship structure doesn't really allow for the 4 best teams to make the playoff, and I would certainly think that's true because last year I do believe that Georgia was one of the 4 best, and we can kind of relitigate that all you want about why Georgia didn't make it, but I think that's probably true. However, for the most part, I'm kind of in favor of fewer eye test debates, even if it's sometimes you don't end up getting the the best overall teams. I like earning your way in more so than anything else because it just sort of shuts down what can be kind of a maddening debate. If I had my way, I think the perfect playoff format would be 8 teams. 5 of them would be conference champions. 3 of them would be at-larges. That's enough, quality to make sure you get the true best teams in. And you let some teams kind of earn their way in. And that's kind of the way that I would do it if I did.
That's why, if and when the playoff expands to 8 teams, I would very muuld like to see them say, if you win your conference, you're in the playoff. And people say, oh, well, what if Pitt, 7-6 Pitt team had won that? We're fine with it.
Yeah, the occasional time that happens, I'd be fine with it. Because also, at a certain point, the Pac-12 and some of these leagues, they're going to stop going along with this stuff if they don't feel like they're in the playoff. Mm-hmm. And, part of this is their own fault, but at a certain point, the only way you have a playoff is because everybody kind of cobbles together and decides to go with it. That's the reason why Notre Dame has such a sweetheart deal. That's the reason why a lot of this stuff is in place because you needed support to get the playoff together in the first place. I think this thing is held together by kind of a very, very thin string as it is right now. So you may have to open up some opportunity for some other teams to make the playoff. Not UCF and the group of 5 teams, but at the very least the Power 5 teams. Otherwise, they're going to stop supporting it. And, you may have a deal one day where you have like an American and National League where, some of these teams play in one league and some of these teams play in another because they can't get along anymore. I feel like there could still be some pretty big changes coming to college athletics in the years to come. And frankly, I don't know that we all know exactly what those are all going to be. All right. We have had a great conversation today. It's been really fun. I promised we'd take a lot more comments today, and I feel like we have done a pretty good job of taking a good many. Hope you feel that way. And if we missed yours, I apologize. You can reach out to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. I'd love to continue the conversation with you there. As I mentioned to Santiago D. Arnold earlier, I have been a little behind on my Twitter stuff just because I've been running around a bunch, but I always appreciate the feedback and the conversation there. Or we will look forward to seeing this afternoon Before the Hedges, 3 p.m., presented by Kroger. My understanding is we'll have a little bit from Mikhail Sherman there. That should be a lot of fun. Huge announcement coming up for us on Monday. Can't wait to talk to you more about that. What a great summer it's going to be, and we hope to see you as a part of it. We will tell you about that then. And, well, we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live once again. Y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to talking to you then.